Some just like to see the sunset reflect on its surface. If one's fishing it,
Look at him. Look at the behemoth.
and skim on its surface. Others are curious about what can be under the surface. But one of the most perplexing mysteries of the lake are stories of a lake monster told by credible eyewitnesses. Sightings of this creature go back as far as the original native Indians that once lived along the Erie shores. The Native American Indians that once lived along the lake shores have always claimed that this aquatic monster lurks in Lake Erie. They describe it as being covered in fish scales and slithers like a snake on the surface of the water, and is able to move up rivers in search for food. But the natives also claim that it could also creep onto land using its large flipper-like appendages. Other witnesses have reported that it's about 30 to 40 feet long and has a terrible odor. Lake Erie was the last lake out of all the Great Lakes to be discovered because of some of the violent Indian tribes that lived around the lake. It was founded by a French explorer in 1615. During the French and Indian War in the mid-18th century, Great Britain took control of the lake. But in 1812, Americans took over ownership of Lake Erie because of a naval victory defeat over Great Britain. One of the oldest recorded sightings of this creature was in 1793. It was from a captain of a ship named the Felicity, which was docked at Middle Bass Island during the incident.
And he was hunting for some ducks. And he shot at a few of them, and he woke something up in the high grass that came out and chased him. He had to run for his life. So that's the first recorded of something strange happening in that area, of a creature that we today call Lake Erie Monster.
One of the earliest and other early sightings was in 1817 in Erie Township of Ottawa County, not far from Toledo, Ohio. Two French settlers saw a huge monster squirming in agony on the beach.
And they went back to get some more help and to get the rope and pull this creature back up further. But when they came back, the creature was gone. But they found these scales that looked like about a $50 size scale.
Lake Erie sea serpent reports in the 1800s were more frequent than monster sightings on land. Even though over time less and less land monster stories were reported, while lake monster sightings increased. The Cleveland Register in 1818 said that every summer for the past 3 years, there have been sightings of a terrifying sea serpent in different parts of the lake. One witness, a lake sailor, who testified he had seen the monster more than once, said the serpent is so large its head and tail stick out of the water as much as 30 feet. Around that same period, an enterprise artist put together all the details he could from witnesses and painted a composite that was something of a sensation. It was on display for a long time in downtown Cleveland at the Museum of Wax Figures. It drew large crowds who would study it with bulging, disbelieving eyes for hours. A report in the Fort Covington Sun-News in New York told of a sighting in the early morning hours on July 13th, 1892, of a giant sea serpent. A schooner was on its way from Buffalo, New York to Toledo, Ohio, when the captain and his crew saw a 50-foot-long sea monster with a 4-foot circumference thrashing in the water half a mile ahead of them. It soon quieted down and laid in full length on the surface of the water. Its head projected 4 feet out of the water, which they described as terrible looking. It had viciously sparkling eyes and a large head, along with large flipper-like appendages. It eventually headed out to deeper water. A published report in 1909, written in the Cleveland Plain Dealer, about a group of Union salt workers claimed that they watched for some time a giant snake churning up the water on the surface for several minutes before eventually moving off towards the direction of Euclid Beach. One of the most alarming stories came in 1912 from an ex-mayor of Millen, Ohio. And he said he was strolling along the Huron River, and he claims he witnessed a sea serpent, some kind of a monster, come out of the water and eat a sheepdog and a groundhog. And he went off and reported it. And the people in the county were scared. They were farmers. And they formed a posse with several weapons, whatever they could think of. And there was a long search along the Huron River of this creature that this ex-mayor saw. But nothing was ever reported being found. The lake consists of 3 basins: the west, central, and eastern. The western basin is the shallowest with a depth of only 30 feet. The central basin is the largest of all the basins with a depth of approximately 60 feet. This area of the lake has a very narrow bottom, which causes a deficiency in oxygen. The deepest part of the lake is the eastern basin, with a depth of 210 feet. Lake Erie covers 9,910 miles and is almost evenly divided between the U.S. and Canada. Lake Erie's main source of water comes from the Detroit River, which delivers water from Lake Huron, while the main outflow of Lake Erie is the Niagara River. After passing over Niagara Falls, Lake Erie's water empties into Lake Ontario. The Welland Canal acts as the lake's lesser outflow, which diverts water for ships passing from Port Colborne, Ontario, on Lake Erie to St. Catharines on Lake Ontario. On July 10th, 1934, a gentleman, along with 5 other bathers, when they saw what they thought was a dog's head sticking out of the water. As they waded out a little to get a closer look, they decided it must be a seal, not a dog. Then, to their horror, they realized that it was a 20-foot-long sea monster. The witnesses described it as having a body shaped like a man's leg and a head like a dog. After watching it for 15 minutes, it headed out to deeper water. Sightings have continued throughout the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, and they continued into the 60s. Some were reported, many were not, for the sake of being ridiculed.
In 1960, there was a fisherman over by Sandusky. A gentleman was fishing up a pier, and he decided, hey, there's a couple of rats over there. I can throw a rock at it. So he threw a rock at it, and this creature just rose up, had flippers, looked at him, and turned around and went back out into the lake. Well, Lake Erie is only about 60 feet deep, and that makes it very, it can create what's known as rogue waves.
A lake that's shallow can present various hazards in navigation. And also, because of the lake being the shallowest, it doesn't take much of a storm for Lake Erie waves to act up. There have been mysterious waves as high as 15 feet high. Appearing out of nowhere and crashing onto the shores of Lake Erie, washing away people and heavy structures, along with depositing huge barges and large tree trunks on dry land.
Well, the thing about the lake is it can turn on a dime. If you're out there, you got to pay attention to the weather, to the boats, you know, what's going on. Because I'll tell you, that lake is, because it is shallow, it can turn fast on you. It can kill you.
But there has been some unexplained disappearances of ships over the years that some contribute to something more than just a siege. Since no winds or storms were reported during the time of these mysterious vanishings. Large working reliable ships that would suddenly disappear from the surface of the lake were never to be found. One ship, a schooner named South America, vanished in 1843 on November 4th, making it the most well-reported disaster of that season. Captain Brady left Buffalo, New York with a full crew, along with a cargo of salt for Toledo, Ohio, never to be seen again. In 1942, there was another ship on December 2nd that disappeared mysteriously, the Admiral. It was a tugboat towing a tanker barge called the Klevko, carrying 1 million gallons of crude oil from the Maumee River's marine terminal onto Lake Erie at sunset and sailed east towards Cleveland. The barge that it was pulling, it was reported by the captain that the rope that was pulling the barge was pointing down into the dark waters instead of straight out. Somehow this barge sank with the rope still taut. Shortly after sending out an SOS to the Coast Guard, they lost all contact with this tanker and the barge. The Admiral just disappeared. On December 7th, 1909, the railroad car ferry, the Marquette and Bessemer, also known as Number 2, sailed out into Lake Erie. It carried 26 railroad cars and their cargo weighing more than 30 tons each. The ship disappeared between Port Stanley, Ontario, and Conneaut, Ohio. Witnesses that lived along the north and south side of the lake heard the ship's distress whistles that night but could not see the ship nor its lights. A few days later, a single lifeboat was discovered, along with the bodies of the crew members, and they were all frozen to death. They were all frozen in place. Like they just froze right where they sat in this life raft. All 9 men were frozen in their seats, along with the ship's cook, who was carrying 2 long galley knives and a meat cleaver, as if trying to defend itself from an unseen foe. A man's clothes laid at the bottom of the boat, indicating that there were originally 10 men in the lifeboat when it was boarded. Another tugboat named the Sachem in 1950 mysteriously disappeared on December 18th. While returning from Buffalo, New York, after delivering a dredger, the winds were reported 14 miles per hour and the water was calm. And it just disappeared. The Sachem was even seen by another captain of a ship before it mysteriously disappeared. And this captain of the steamer said that there was no signals, there was no sign that it was in distress. Now, whether these disappearance of these ships are the cause of this Lake Erie Monster, as some predict, it is unknown. Sightings have continued throughout the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, and they continued into the 60s. Some were reported, many were not, for the sake of being ridiculed.
In 1960, there was a fisherman over by Sandusky, a gentleman was fishing up a pier, and he decided, hey, there's a couple of rats over there. I can throw a rock at it. So he threw a rock at it, and this creature just rose up, had flippers, looked at him, and turned around and went back out into the lake. Cleveland, Lake Erie, at one point it was the butt of the jokes that it was a lake that was practically dead. The other thing is, it was the butt of a lot of jokes on Saturday Night Live, and even in Dr. Seuss books they wrote about how bad this lake was. But mainly the river was what was really catching fire. Come on, that's a lake. That's water. Yeah, it was for the longest time. You couldn't fish out of there. You couldn't eat anything out of there. It was just so polluted.